Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sound Mind podcast, where we dive into the fascinating world of music psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, and as a music psychologist, I'll be guiding you through everything you've ever wanted to know about music. So whether you're a music lover or just interested in the science of sound, you're in the right place. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head that just won't get out? Whether it's a catchy pop song or a random theme tune from a childhood cartoon that you haven't heard in years, it loops on repeat, sometimes for hours or even days. Well, today I want to talk about this crazy phenomenon which are known as earworms. And while they can be entertaining at first, they also have a way of driving us a little bit, well, mad. Today we're diving deep into what earworms are, why we get them, and what's happening in the brain when they show up. We'll also explore who's more prone to them, what makes a song stick, and I'll also share some strategies that might help you finally get rid of them in those frustrating moments. So let's get into it. It always starts innocently enough. You're brushing your teeth, doing chores, or just out and about, and suddenly, there it is. That chorus. Again. It loops and loops, and no matter what you do, it's like your brain's got its own DJ, and it's stuck on repeat. We call these mental musical loops earworms, and they're one of the quirkiest and, at times, most annoying psychological phenomena most of us experience regularly. But here's the thing. What seems like a silly, fleeting annoyance is actually a fascinating glimpse into how our brains process music, memory, and even emotion. First off, let's get clear on the definition. Earworms, also more formally known in the music psychology field as involuntary musical imagery, are defined as segments of music that come to mind without any actual auditory trigger or intentional recall. It's spontaneous, and sometimes it feels impossible to shut off. The term was coined over 100 years ago by German psychiatrist Cornelius Eckert. The vivid imagery that the term brings up speaks to the way that these melodies can burrow deep into our minds, sometimes without permission, and take up residence for hours or even days. It's a word that perfectly captures the almost parasitic nature of the experience, as if the tune is wriggling around in your brain on an endless loop. Since Eckert first described the phenomenon, there has been an increasing scientific interest in understanding how and why these musical intrusions occur. Research over the past few decades has uncovered that most earworms tend to have a looping structure. Typically, it's not the entire song that replays itself in your mind, but rather a specific fragment, a short section often about 15 to 30 seconds long. This loop is usually a distinct, easily memorable part of the song, maybe the chorus, the hook, or a standout riff. These snippets tend to have qualities that make them particularly sticky, simple, repetitive, melodic, and rhythmically engaging. Studies show that about 90% of people experience earworms at least once a week. They usually last between 15 to 30 minutes, though they can pop up randomly throughout the day. Some people even report waking up to them. They can pop up at random when you're doing mundane tasks like washing the dishes, commuting, or even just staring out of the window. One of the most fascinating psychological explanations for earworms comes from the Zeigarnik effect, named after Bluma Zeigarnik, a Russian psychologist who first explored this phenomenon in the 1920s. The Zeigarnik effect describes a very interesting quirk of our memory. We tend to remember unfinished or interrupted tasks much better than completed ones. Zeigarnik's classic experiment provides a striking example of this. She observed waiters in a cafe and found that they were able to remember complex orders with remarkable accuracy while they were still in the process of delivering them. However, once the order was completed and the task was done, their memory of the order would fade extremely quickly. Essentially, the memory stayed sharp as long as the task was still open, but once completed, it disappeared from their minds. This phenomenon suggests that our brains have a tendency to keep unfinished business active, almost as if it's unresolved and needs to be completed or closed. And when it comes to earworms, this principle works in a very similar way. So, if you hear part of a song or a melody that feels incomplete, your brain doesn't just forget about it. Instead, it treats the incomplete song as unfinished business. Your brain keeps it active in your working memory, persistently trying to close the loop and resolve it, which is why you might find yourself compulsively humming the chorus of a song over and over again, but struggling to recall the bridge or the outro. This happens to me all the time with Instagram and TikTok videos. I'm scrolling and I hear part of a song that I recognize, and then I start singing it in a loop, trying to figure out where I know it from. This literally happened to me the other day, and I found myself just singing the same part of the song over and over again. It wasn't going anywhere, and I don't know why I couldn't recall the rest of the song. It's so frustrating. But think of it as an incomplete puzzle that you can't quite finish. Your brain is constantly returning to it, trying to complete the picture, even if you didn't consciously intend to keep thinking about it. Like with me, I found myself literally the following day randomly thinking of the rest of the song, and it was such a eureka moment. I was like, yes, I found it. But this is why songs with unresolved or suspended endings, like a sudden fade out or an open cadence in the melody, are particularly effective at becoming earworms. Your mind feels the need to finish the song, and that lingering sense of incompleteness is what fuels the persistence of the earworm. This phenomenon ties into how our brains prioritize attention. Anything that is unresolved or incomplete gets more mental energy because we perceive it as something that needs to be dealt with. This is an adaptive function of our memory system, which is designed to help us focus on things that are still pending or need closure. Now I want to talk about some of the most common triggers for earworms. Some of these are surprisingly ordinary, woven into the fabric of our everyday experiences. Yet the science behind these triggers reveals just how deeply music is intertwined with memory, mood, and our environment. One of the most obvious triggers is recent exposure to music. You hear a song, and before you know it, it's playing on repeat in your mind. This often happens without any conscious effort on your part. You could be listening to the radio on your morning commute, walking through a shopping mall with background music playing, or scrolling through TikTok to that same trending sound over and over again. Repeated exposure is one of the key factors in earworm formation, and pop culture is relentless when it comes to repetition. Ever notice how a song that you didn't even like at first somehow becomes catchy after hearing it 3 or 4 times? Well, that's your brain responding to repetition and familiarity, two of the most powerful ingredients in the recipe for an earworm. As music is part of our lives today more than ever before, neurologist Oliver Sacks wonders if earworms are a problem of an electronic age. He highlights that more than a century ago, most people had to go to parties, concert halls, or even places of worship to hear music. There were no radios, stereos, or MP3 players that people could turn on and play their personal playlists. But today, people are surrounded by music wherever they go, in cars, stores, and through their headphones. Earworms have constant access to people's minds and memories. This also ties directly into what psychologists call the recency effect. Simply put, the last song you heard is often the one that's most likely to stick around in your short-term memory, and from there, morph into an earworm. The recency effect is a concept rooted in cognitive psychology, referring to our tendency to better recall items, or in this case, music, that we've most recently been exposed to. If you end a playlist with an upbeat track, or if a jingle plays as you're leaving a store, chances are that's what your brain latches onto, particularly if there's an absence of other sensory input competing for attention. The tune slips into your working memory and, when left unchecked, starts looping. But it's not just about when you heard the song. Your mood at the time also plays a critical role. Studies have shown that when we're in heightened emotional states, we're more likely to experience involuntary musical imagery, or earworms. One study found that people often report experiencing earworms when they're feeling stressed or under pressure. It's almost like your brain is trying to anchor itself with something familiar and predictable in a moment of emotional intensity. Even if you have a negative or neutral emotional reaction to a song, your brain tags it as significant based on previous associations or experiences. So, for example, that song you didn't like but you heard it over and over again during a stressful time, might get stuck in your head even if you don't enjoy it. Your brain will latch onto it because it's encoded with some emotional significance, whether positive or negative. So there was one respondent to a survey on earworms, and she spoke about getting a song by Bananarama first stuck in her head when she was 16 and taking a big exam. And now she gets that song at every moment of stress in her life. She's experienced that earworm on her wedding, during childbirth, everything. Isn't that insane? But on the flip side, earworms can also appear when we're in a positive and excited mood. Say, right after a concert or a party where music was a big part of the experience. Your brain is primed with emotional energy and music. Being such a powerful emotional trigger, it rises to the surface and sticks. Another trigger can be associations. People, places, and memories can all act as potent earworm triggers. Music is often tied to specific experiences, people, or locations in our lives. And when something in your environment reminds you of one of those moments, your brain can unconsciously cue up the soundtrack that went along with it. Another survey respondent example from that study that I just mentioned is someone talking about seeing a shoebox in their office by a brand called Faith. And before she knew it, she had Faith by George Michael stuck in her head for the rest of the afternoon. There's even a theory that earworms might act as a memory retrieval tool. Music is so tightly bound to episodic memory that when we recall an event, the music associated with it often surfaces alongside it. This idea connects with what neuroscientists call context-dependent memory, where environmental cues can trigger specific memories and the music linked to them. For example, imagine hearing a song that was playing during a significant life event. A wedding, a holiday, or even a breakup. Even if you're not consciously thinking about that moment, a trigger in your current environment, like a smell, a sight, or even a feeling, can pull that song from the depths of your memory and into the present. But that brings out a deeper question. Is there an evolutionary reason for earworms? Well, some researchers believe there might be. One theory suggests that earworms are tied to our brain's love of pattern recognition and repetition, skills that were key to survival for our ancestors. Recognizing repeating sounds like the rhythm of footsteps or the calls of animals could have been the difference between life and death. Music, with its repetitive hooks and patterns, taps into this ancient survival mechanism. Daniel Levitin, a psychologist and neuroscientist, argues that for most of human history, memory was quite literally a survival tool. Long before we had written language, oral tradition was everything. The way we remembered things was through song, and these songs were repetitive, easy to remember, and designed to get stuck. Levitin points out that rhythm, rhyme, and melody act as cognitive anchors. They provide reinforcing cues that make it easier for our brains to encode and retrieve information. It's the same reason why nursery rhymes, chants, and even jingles are so effective. There's a kind of superglue effect when all three elements come together. And this, in many ways, explains why certain songs, and even fragments of songs, loop uncontrollably in our minds. Earworms might be a quirk of evolution, but they're based on processes designed to help us not forget. But why music? And why is it so powerful in triggering these involuntary memories? Well, Dr. Victoria Williamson, another leading researcher in this space, suggests that music is one of the most multi-sensory experiences that we can have. We explored this in last week's episode, where we discussed how complex our memory for music is and how it taps into so many different areas of the brain. It's not just about what we hear, it's about what we see, what we feel, and how we move. If you're a musician, you might remember how a piece looks on sheet music, how your fingers move on the piano keys, or the physical sensation of strumming a guitar. And even if you're not playing, there's often movement involved, whether you're tapping your foot, dancing, or just feeling your heart race during an emotional chorus. Williamson also highlights that music is encoded in our brains in deeply personal and emotional ways. And we know that emotional experiences tend to form stronger, longer-lasting memories. That's why a song you listen to during a breakup or on a road trip with friends can instantly transport you back to that moment, even years later. When music gets linked to emotional experiences, our brains prioritize it. We're hardwired to remember the things that matter, and our emotions are the ultimate signal that something matters. This is all part of a larger cognitive phenomenon that I mentioned earlier, known as involuntary memory. Williamson puts it like this: an earworm is in the same category as suddenly remembering that you need to call an old friend, or having a craving for a certain food that seemingly comes out of nowhere. These mental pop-ups are automatic. They bypass our conscious awareness and just appear. So when you find yourself stuck on a 20-second loop of Call Me Maybe or Baby Shark, your brain is essentially doing what it evolved to do. It's grabbing hold of repetitive, emotionally charged information and keeping it active. It's the same neural machinery that helped early humans survive by remembering life or death information, just repurposed in the age of pop music. And interestingly, this process doesn't actually require you to like the song. Unfortunately, you don't need to enjoy a tune for it to become an earworm. Some of the most persistent musical loops people report are songs that they actively dislike. It's not about preference, it's about how your brain processes the pattern. If it's simple, repetitive, and emotionally sticky, whether you love it or hate it, it's got earworm potential. When you think of an earworm, you might think of a catchy pop song, but these songs aren't catchy just because they're designed to be. They tap into something deeper. Simple, repetitive musical structures, like catchy choruses or hooks, activate certain areas in the brain responsible for memory and repetition. This makes them more likely to get stuck in your head. What matters is the structure, those repetitive hooks, melodies, and rhythms that make it easy for your brain to latch onto. Studies have revealed that earworms are often triggered by songs with a high degree of repetition and simplicity. Pop songs with their predictable, looped refrains are prime candidates for this kind of cognitive processing. The simple rhythmic and melodic patterns offer the brain an easy framework to replay, and once that loop starts, it can be really hard to turn it off. For me, it was Dance Monkey. I absolutely can't stand that song and would dread when it came on the radio because I knew that I wouldn't be able to unhear it for the rest of the day. And that's definitely an example of a simple, repetitive song. This is a perfect example of how our cognitive systems are designed to find and reinforce patterns, even if those patterns don't align with our preferences. It shows how sometimes we really can't escape these loops simply because they're encoded so deeply into our cognitive architecture. They might not be pleasant, but they're definitely memorable. One study published in 2016 asked 3,000 people to name their most frequent earworm tunes. Although these are quite outdated now, I thought it would be interesting to go through them because they're definitely songs that we all know of and there's surely some patterns here. So, the top 9 songs were Bad Romance by Lady Gaga, Can't Get You Out of My Head by Kylie Minogue, Don't Stop Believing by Journey, Somebody That I Used to Know by Gautier, Moves Like Jagger by Maroon 5, California Girls by Katy Perry, Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen, Alejandro by Lady Gaga, and Poker Face by Lady Gaga. Wow, Lady Gaga really has this earworm formula down to a T. So, the study found that the tunes most likely to get stuck in people's heads were those with the more common global melodic contours, meaning that they have overall melodic shapes commonly found in Western pop music. For example, one of the most common contour patterns is heard in Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, where the first phrase rises in pitch and the second falls. Numerous other nursery tunes follow the same pattern, making them easy for young children to remember. The opening riff of Moves Like Jagger by Maroon 5 also follows this common contour pattern of rising, then falling in pitch. In addition to a common melodic shape, The other crucial ingredient in the earworm formula is an unusual interval structure in the song, such as some unexpected leaps or more repeated notes than you would expect to hear in the average pop song. It was also found that the earworm songs had a faster tempo. The findings show that you can, to some extent, predict which songs are going to get stuck in people's heads based on the song's melodic content. The researchers highlighted that this could help aspiring songwriters or advertisers write a jingle that everyone will remember for days or months afterwards. Not sure if this is a good thing for the rest of us, but the industry's tough. I get it. Now, before we move forward, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, it would mean so much if you could rate the podcast or leave a quick review wherever you're listening. It really makes a huge difference in helping the Sound Mind reach more like-minded listeners just like you. Thank you so much for your support, and with that being said, let's get back into it. Now let's move on to what exactly is happening in the brain from a neuroscience perspective. The neuroscience behind earworms is both fascinating and complex, involving several key brain areas. When we experience an earworm, our brain isn't just passively replaying a song in the background. Instead, it's actively engaging different systems that control memory, emotion, and the processing of sound. When earworms occur, it's believed that the areas of the brain involved in musical processing get stuck, resulting in us experiencing musical memories involuntarily. One of the most important brain regions involved in earworms is the auditory cortex, which is responsible for processing sounds. The auditory cortex is located in the temporal lobes, and it gets activated when we hear music, even when the song is playing only in our minds. This phenomenon was demonstrated in a study by Levitin and colleagues in 2005, who found that when participants imagined music, their auditory cortex still lit up, much like when you actually listen to the tune. This means that when an earworm strikes, your brain is essentially replaying the song as if it was being heard in real time. Interestingly, the auditory cortex doesn't only respond to the sound itself, but also to the expectations we have of the song. For instance, if the song is familiar, your brain already knows how it should unfold, and this predictability reinforces the likelihood of the song getting stuck in a loop. Along with the auditory cortex, another brain region that plays a significant role in earworms is the frontal cortex, particularly the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is involved in higher-order cognitive functions, such as attention, decision-making, and working memory. When an earworm enters your mind, the prefrontal cortex helps sustain the thought, keeping the song looping in your memory. This is part of why earworms often persist even when you try to distract yourself from them. Essentially, the prefrontal cortex keeps the song active in your working memory, reinforcing this loop. The striatum, which is part of the brain's reward system, is also engaged during earworms. The striatum processes reward-related information and plays a role in reinforcing behaviors. Music that we find enjoyable or emotionally evocative is more likely to get stuck in our heads because it triggers dopamine release, which is a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and motivation. So, if the song is one that you enjoy, your brain is essentially rewarding you by keeping it in a loop. Dopamine plays a role in reinforcing the rewarding experience of music, making it more likely that our brains will keep returning to the same track again and again. This reward-based reinforcement system may help explain why earworms can be linked to emotional experiences. Certain songs have the power to evoke strong emotional memories, and when those memories are positive or meaningful, the brain continues to revisit them. The hippocampus, a brain region known for its role in memory formation and retrieval, is also involved. If a particular song evokes strong memories or emotions, the hippocampus may cue the song to replay in your mind, particularly when the brain is in a state of rest or daydreaming. In this way, earworms are not just about the song, but also about the emotional and memory associations tied to it. Interestingly, earworms are also connected to a phenomenon called repetition suppression. This occurs when your brain experiences a stimulus repeatedly, and the response from the brain starts to diminish over time. However, earworms don't really follow this pattern. they tend to stay active in the brain even after the initial novelty wears off. And this may be due to the brain's inclination to keep processing repetitive patterns, a feature linked to music's ability to form strong memories and emotional responses. Our brains seem to be particularly wired to recognize and process music in a way that makes it harder to let go of once it's been embedded in our memory. So, this all highlights that earworms are the result of complex interactions between various brain regions. They aren't just random annoyances. They're intricately linked to how our brains process, store, and even reward music. It's a complex web of cognitive and emotional processing. But there might be some of you listening that don't relate to this so much. Maybe you rarely experience earworms, whilst others experience them daily or even weekly. While earworms are a universal phenomenon, some people seem more susceptible to experiencing them than others. Research has shown that certain groups, such as musicians, people with OCD tendencies, and certain personality types, are more prone to these involuntary musical memories. Musicians, unsurprisingly, are particularly vulnerable to earworms. This is likely due to the way their brains process music differently from non-musicians. Studies have shown that musicians have heightened activity in the auditory cortex when engaging with music, meaning that their brains are more finely tuned to musical stimuli. Various studies have suggested that because musicians often focus on musical details and have a more complex musical representation in their mind, they're more prone to having pieces of music loop in their heads involuntarily. But this also includes people who are highly engaged with music, whether they listen to it frequently or just have a deep emotional connection to it. A study found that people who listened to music more frequently or who were more emotionally involved with music were more likely to report earworm experiences. This may be because highly engaged listeners have a stronger representation of music and are more likely to engage in music-related thoughts, making them more susceptible to experiencing musical memories. This is similar to how people with high levels of musical expertise, like musicians, have a greater sensitivity to music and its patterns. People with obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, are also more likely to experience earworms. OCD is categorized by intrusive thoughts that are difficult to control, and it appears that earworms may be a form of this kind of mental intrusion. One study suggested that individuals with OCD tendencies are more likely to get stuck on repetitive, intrusive thoughts, which aligns with the experience of earworms. The repetitive nature of earworms mirrors the compulsive thought patterns seen in OCD, contributing to their persistence. People with OCD may have a heightened sensitivity to intrusive mental content, making them more prone to earworms. For them, these earworms can feel like compulsive thoughts looping continuously in their mind, much like the mental checking behaviors observed in OCD. The repetitive nature of earworms, which can intrude unexpectedly and persist despite efforts to distract oneself, resembles the compulsive thought patterns that define OCD. Individuals with OCD also tend to struggle with letting go of thoughts, even when those thoughts are unhelpful or distressing. This difficulty in disengaging extends to music, making earworms particularly persistent. While individuals without OCD may eventually manage to distract themselves from an earworm, those with OCD may find distractions less effective, as the earworm continues to occupy their attention, often amplifying their anxiety. The cognitive mechanisms that underlie both OCD and earworms share similarities, particularly in relation to cognitive rigidity, the tendency to fixate on specific thoughts or mental patterns. Neuroimaging studies have shown that OCD is associated with abnormal activity in brain regions involved in cognitive control, such as the prefrontal cortex and the striatum. And as I mentioned previously, similar brain regions are implicated in the experience of earworms. This overlap suggests that the same cognitive processes contributing to repetitive thinking in OCD may also play a role in the occurrence and persistence of earworms. When it comes to understanding who is more likely to experience earworms, links with certain personality traits have also been drawn. One of the most commonly used models in academia is the Big Five, which includes 5 broad dimensions of personality: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These traits help us understand the variations in behavior, emotions, and cognitive patterns that shape our personalities. Research has shown that certain traits within this model are closely associated with a higher frequency of earworms. For example, individuals who score high in openness to experience may be more likely to experience earworms. Openness to experience is categorized by a strong inclination towards novelty, creativity, and curiosity. These individuals often have a rich imagination and a propensity for creative thinking, which may make them more susceptible to having songs or musical fragments stick in their minds. Their creative and open-minded nature may lead them to mentally engage with music more vividly, causing fragments of songs to loop in their minds. On the flip side, individuals who score high in neuroticism, which is a trait associated with emotional instability and a tendency to experience negative emotions, are also more prone to earworms. Neuroticism is characterized by frequent feelings of anxiety, stress, and mood swings, which can create a mental environment where intrusive thoughts, including earworms, are more likely to arise. Additionally, the emotional intensity associated with neuroticism may make songs with strong emotional associations more likely to get stuck. Another personality trait that plays a role in earworm susceptibility is perfectionism, which is often related to high levels of conscientiousness. Perfectionists tend to have high standards, a need for precision, and a strong attention to detail. When it comes to music, perfectionists may focus on specific patterns, harmonies, or even the technical aspects of a song. This focused attention, combined with their tendency to ruminate on the details, can make it difficult for them to let go of a song once it enters their mind. Their drive for control and precision can keep the song looping in their heads, especially if they're unable to resolve the mental discrepancy they feel when a song doesn't perfectly align with their expectations. This tendency to obsess over details may increase the likelihood of earworms as the brain continues to process the song's elements over and over again. Now, I want to finish off with some strategies for dealing with earworms. For many people, earworms can be incredibly frustrating and disruptive. The more you try to push the song out of your mind, the more it seems to intensify. This paradoxical effect is known as the ironic process theory, a concept introduced by social psychologist Daniel Wegner in the 1980s. The theory says that the harder we try to suppress a thought or feeling, the more it resurfaces. And this is because our brain, when instructed to avoid something, inadvertently focuses on it, making it even more difficult to push out of our consciousness. It's why, when we try to ignore an earworm, it often feels like the song gets stuck on repeat, rather than fading away. This can lead to frustration, as trying to stop thinking about the earworm seems to have the opposite effect. But by understanding the underlying processes at play, we can better navigate these annoying mental intrusions when they inevitably occur. Interestingly, some research and strategies have suggested ways to manage earworms or alleviate the discomfort associated with them. One common recommendation is distraction. Studies have shown that engaging in tasks that require focus or mental effort, such as reading, solving puzzles, or even counting, can help divert attention away from the song and break the loop. A study found that when participants engaged in a cognitively demanding task, they reported fewer instances of earworms, as their brain shifted its focus to the new task. This suggests that redirecting attention to something else can interrupt the brain's tendency to replay a song in our mind. Another technique for dealing with earworms is to listen to the full version of the song. While it might seem counterintuitive at first, research suggests that playing the entire song through can help resolve the earworm by providing your brain with the closure that it craves. When you only hear a fragment of a song, your brain may feel like something is incomplete, causing the song to loop endlessly. But by listening to the full song, you essentially scratch that musical itch, giving your brain the satisfaction of completing the piece of music. This strategy can sometimes stop the loop, allowing your mind to move on. For some, the act of humming or singing another song may also provide relief. It's believed that switching to a new song, especially one that is familiar, can overwrite the stuck track and provide a mental reset. The brain seems to prefer closure, and by consciously choosing to introduce a new musical fragment, you might disrupt the repetitive cycle. Another quite funny strategy is to chew gum. And I know, as weird as it sounds, a study conducted by some researchers at the University of Reading revealed that the motor activity involved when chewing gum can interfere with the ability to hear the music mentally, helping to cure the earworm and reduce overall voluntary and involuntary musical thoughts. The act of chewing gum may help distract the brain from the repetitive musical fragments by engaging the motor and cognitive processes associated with oral movement. This is definitely an unexpectedly effective remedy, and there might be limited empirical backing, but if it works for you, it works. On a more cognitive level, mindfulness and acceptance have been shown to be effective strategies. By acknowledging the earworm without trying to force it away and allowing it to coexist with your thoughts without reacting to it, you might reduce its intensity. Studies have found that people who engage in mindfulness practices are often less bothered by intrusive thoughts, including earworms, because they don't try to suppress them. Instead, they observe them non-judgmentally and let them fade naturally. Some studies even suggest that cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, a therapeutic approach commonly used to address intrusive thoughts, could be applied to earworms. Techniques from CBT, such as reframing or confronting unwanted thoughts, might help manage the mental distress caused by persistent earworms. So, whether entertaining or frustrating, the common phenomenon of earworms demonstrates the profound impact of music on our minds. They're a fascinating blend of psychology, neuroscience, and even a touch of evolutionary history. Earworms aren't just random annoyances, they're a window into how our brains process music, memory, and emotion. So, the next time a song gets stuck in your head, try to observe it with a bit of curiosity rather than frustration. Maybe even try to analyze why that particular song is looping. Is it the rhythm, the melody, or perhaps a memory that it's tied to? But on that note, that's all for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me today on The Sound Mind. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please rate or review on wherever you're listening and share it with someone that might just find it interesting. How about that person in your life that you know just randomly bursts into song all the time? I think that they would find this fascinating. Don't forget to follow us and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. And come and say hi on Instagram and Threads at The Sound Mind Talks. We've got an amazing growing community over there. I absolutely love engaging with you all. So yeah, come and say hi. But until next time, keep listening, keep reflecting, and I'll see you on The Sound Mind.